Hi everyone, today we're going to be doing a deep dive into a key issue for all Oracle users. Standard Edition or Enterprise Edition? Everyone knows that Enterprise Edition is crazy expensive, but just how expensive is it? Do you really need all the fancy features? Could Standard Edition be a good choice for you and your business? I've been in the business of database disaster recovery for over 15 years, and leading a team of DBAs and software developers that deal with Oracle on a daily basis, this subject comes up a lot. If I ask a DBA about Standard Edition versus Enterprise Edition, most people will kind of default to Enterprise Edition. I find that there's a notion out there that Enterprise is the real version of Oracle, whereas Standard Edition can be treated as some sort of starter pack for beginners. This is certainly not the case, however, as often Standard Edition is more than capable of meeting the real-life workloads of most medium and even large-scale businesses. Depending on your environment and requirements, it's entirely reasonable to save up to 75% on your Oracle license costs by choosing to stick with Standard Edition rather than going to Enterprise. And the cost burden isn't the only thing to worry about. In this video, we're going to go through 5 important areas of consideration: license costs, processor limitations, security, performance, and disaster recovery. We're also going to cover a couple of gotchas and ways to make the most of whatever Oracle version you choose. So let's start off with looking at license costs, because typically this is where this conversation begins. First things first, it's very difficult to note down an exact cost for an Oracle license these days, as this is very dependent on a particular partner, project, and discount that you're able to negotiate for yourselves. However, we can still get a good, useful, real-time baseline by looking at the basic rates of each version and applying them to a real-world scenario. So let's start off with just such a basic example. We're going to look at a mid-sized business and assume that they need 4 cores to run their Oracle database. This is a good, reasonable number for a basic workload across a mid-tier organization. The base price for a 4-core Enterprise Edition license, including the software maintenance option for a year, as well as the recommended add-ons, plugins, and software packs, is $115,900, or $231,800 for a pair. A pair, of course, being a primary and a standby database. And it is, of course, highly recommended that you always have a standby database, no matter what option you choose. We'll get onto more on that in just a second. For Standard Edition, on the other hand, the licensing model is a little bit different. Rather than pricing per core, Standard Edition is priced per CPU socket, per physical CPU unit. And the price for that, again including software maintenance for 1 year, is $21,350 per database, therefore $42,700 for a pair. For Enterprise Edition, you would almost certainly be using a feature called Data Guard, which allows you to create and keep in sync your standby database. Standard Edition, Data Guard is not available, and often DBAs will treat this as a deal breaker. However, it's important to note that using a third-party disaster recovery tool, such as DBU's Standby Multi-Platform, together with your Standard Edition license, would still only bring the cost up to about $46,200 for a pair, a marginal difference given the cost involved. So let's extrapolate that out by 5 years for this 4-core example environment that we've been talking about, and add a 30% discount over the top across the board, which represents a real-world discount that you might be able to get from an Oracle partner. Over the 5 years for Enterprise, you arrive at a cost of $279,000, whereas a comparable Standard Edition plus Standby Multi-Platform environment would only be about $69,000. Now that's a saving of 75%, or almost $210,000 across just 5 years. And if we use all the same calculations for an 8-core environment over the 5-year term, we would arrive at a savings of $438,000, almost $500,000, just for the licensing costs. Now that's a lot of dollar signs. Of course, everybody would love to make that saving, but Enterprise Edition does exist for a reason, and cost is not the only factor here. So now let's move on and compare some of the other differences between Oracle versions. Processor limitations. So just like Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition are licensed differently, They also have different limits on how they can make use of hardware. Standard Edition has a hard limit on the number of physical processing units it can utilize, and that limit is 2. So that means that even if your server has more than 2 physical processors, more than 2 CPU sockets available, an Oracle Standard Edition database will not be able to utilize them. There is also a thread limit. A Standard Edition Oracle database cannot use more than 16 threads at a single time. However, the number of cores per CPU unit is not limited. Now, before you think that Standard Edition cannot scale at all, however, it is important to remember that 2 physical processors are typically more than enough for the vast majority of workloads. Unless you are dealing with major real-time financial or analytical applications, chances are that 2 full dedicated processors are going to be able to handle whatever you throw at them. The rule of thumb then with regards to these processor limits is that Standard Editions should typically be completely sufficient. The only time that's not the case is when you know exactly what your requirements are and you have measured expectations for what applications you require to have a high load. In that case, it makes perfect sense to go to Enterprise. Otherwise, you could be spending a lot of money for no gain. Now that we've talked about processor limitations, let's move on to something else that's equally important, which is the subject of security. Now these days, it seems like we hear about a major data breach every other day. And as we just covered earlier, your database probably contains some pretty important stuff, so it's critical that you think about protecting it. Standard Edition offers some good basic features for database security, things like user authentication and role-based access control. There isn't much beyond that, however, so if using Standard Edition, you really need to be on your game with regards to how your entire environment around the database is controlled. How do you control server access, file access? What auditing do you have in place system-wide? This is going to be how you're able to authenticate every query coming in and keep your database safe. Enterprise Edition, on the other hand, is very strong in this area, offering you a plethora of options for advanced control over your data. Transparent Data Encryption, TDE for short, encrypts data at rest in an Oracle Enterprise Edition database, which protects you if someone can gain access to your physical drives. Database Vault ensures superior protection for your most critical data by further enforcing a separation of duties even beyond basic database user roles. Now, if you have a large corporate data landscape to control, you're almost certainly better off going with Enterprise Edition. You're going to have more tools and more options to get it right. However, just like with the processor limits we've spoken about earlier, the reality is that for any normal deployment in a mid-sized business, the protection and the options offered by Standard Edition and what you can do yourselves are typically more than sufficient without going into the level of complexity offered by these advanced features. Real-world database security is mostly achieved by what you do outside of your database rather than what you do within it. Do you, for example, encrypt your backups? Do you have a system-wide access auditing platform installed? Do you have alerts and notifications set up to alert you of system events? It's things like this that will control real unauthorized access to your systems, and you can achieve this just as easily with Standard Edition as you can with Enterprise Edition. Another thing to keep in mind of if you are going to be using these features is that if you're determined to get value out of them, you absolutely need to have a veteran DBA on staff, because all of these features, while powerful, are very complicated to configure and set up. Much like with the security options we just discussed earlier, Oracle Enterprise Edition shines with performance tuning. It's really where it comes into its own. Many advanced options are available to help you get the most out of your database, including advanced partitioning options, in-memory query optimization that for some workloads enable them to run orders of magnitude faster. Even automatic workload repository and active session history. Those are both features that help you to identify bottlenecks and allow historical performance comparisons. Those last two options, by the way, just happen to be part of an additional add-on pack available at a price over and above that of even Enterprise itself, which again demonstrates a difference in approach. In reality, Few databases and few DBAs really require this level of performance. These tools may be cool to play with, but only a truly large database serving a major institution would get any real cost-benefit value from these features. Last but not least, database disaster recovery, preparing for what happens if the primary database is destroyed or otherwise becomes unavailable. This is absolutely critical, as a catastrophic loss of data would be fatal to most of today's information-dependent businesses. On Standard Edition, there are no built-in DR features beyond basic backups, typically created using the RMAN tool. Archive logs must first be manually created on primary database, brought across again manually to standby, and the standby database, also by the way, manually created, would then have these logs applied onto it. Switchover and failover processes are also entirely manual and have to be controlled by the DBA directly. Historically, this has often been a major limitation of Standard Edition, and many a DBA has chosen to go to Enterprise Edition just because of this one fact. However, the reality is that there's no need to do this in the vast majority of cases. Third-party tools, much like dbvisit Standby Multi-Platform, being one of the biggest and widely used, are more than capable of automating and helping you to configure disaster recovery for your Oracle Standard Edition database with DataGuard-like functionality without the associated cost. Moving on to Enterprise Edition, just like with the other subjects that we covered in today's video, several built-in disaster recovery methods exist, with the most important feature being DataGuard, a method of setting up and configuring and then synchronizing to a standby database on a remote host. Both the Enterprise DataGuard feature and dbvisit Standby Multi-Platform for Standard Edition rely on a concept called physical replication, which basically means that they both rely on copying the entire database state. The standby database is functionally identical to the primary database. This is the most reliable and the most recommended method typically used for database disaster recovery. In addition to physical replication, there also exists something called logical replication, whereby instead of synchronizing the entire database, only selected tables or data sets are brought across to a standby. In Enterprise Edition, there's a tool for this called Golden Gate, which is again coming at a significant premium over and above the cost of Enterprise Edition itself. I'm sure you can sense the pattern by now. The takeaway is that while Enterprise Edition offers excellent built-in DR functionality, there's really no reason to upgrade to it from Standard Edition if this is the only or the most pressing requirement. It is entirely possible to use a tool like dbvisit Standby Multi-Platform to attain DataGuard-like functionality on Oracle Standard Edition, all while saving a huge amount of money in the process. Only you can know what your business requirements are for your database, so only you can make the choice. But if you'd like some help making the right choice, please reach out to us at any time. Here at dbvisit, we believe that 90% of small to medium businesses would do just as well with Oracle Standard Edition and Standby Multi-Platform for disaster recovery as they would on Enterprise. And remember, this represents a saving to you of at least 75% on Oracle licensing costs, up to $500,000 over a 5-year term.